Line up with your plastic tray because today we're going back into a 1970s school cafeteria where lunch wasn't just about food, it was about class. Middle-class kids might have flashed their shiny Snoopy lunchboxes packed with Hostess treats, but poor kids had the bare minimum, the cheapest staples our parents or schools could scrape together. From powdered milk that clumped in your cup to sandwiches stuffed with nothing but mayonnaise, these weren't gourmet meals. They were survival. And yet, they've stuck with us, burned into memory like the smell of a cafeteria hot plate. Today, we're counting down 25 school lunches from the 1970s that only the poor ate. Watch the video till the end, and I guarantee the last one will bring back memories you thought you'd buried. Number 1. Bologna sandwich on white bread. If you grew up poor in the 1970s, chances are your lunchbox held the infamous bologna sandwich. Just 2 slices of cheap white bread, a slab of bologna straight from the plastic package, maybe a swipe of mustard if your folks splurged. The bread was always soggy by noon, and the meat had that rubbery snap, meaning that everyone in the cafeteria knew exactly what you were eating. Still, it filled you up, and for some kids it was lunch day after day. The rich kids had turkey slices or peanut butter and jelly. We had bologna. And if you were lucky, your mom cut it into triangles, so at least it looked a little fancier. Next up, let's talk about the drink that tried to pass for milk. Number 2. Powdered milk in wax cartons. Powdered milk was the cafeteria's not-so-secret shame. Poured from cardboard cartons, it looked like regular milk, but one sip told the truth. Chalky, lumpy, and somehow both watery and thick, it left a film on your tongue that no amount of cafeteria rolls could wash away. Schools leaned on it because it was cheap, and the government provided it in bulk. Poor kids knew the difference instantly. We'd glance at each other across the lunch table with that look that said, "Yeah, it's the fake stuff today." Compare that to the chocolate milk cartons the other kids got, and you couldn't help but feel left out. But hey, it beat drinking from the rusty water fountain. Let's talk about the side dish that smelled before it even hit your tray. Number 3. Cold leftover fried potatoes. At home, poor parents got creative with leftovers. One absolute classic was wrapping last night's fried potatoes in foil and sending them off as lunch. And by noon, they were stone cold, greasy, and clumped together. But you ate them anyway because hunger beat taste every time. Some kids even smashed them between bread, turning potatoes into a kind of sad sandwich. They were heavy, they filled your stomach, and they didn't cost a dime if you already had them from dinner. Sure, the rich kids got shiny bags of Lay's, but we were munching on yesterday's skillet scraps. And if you were lucky enough, you could get some ketchup from the cafeteria, which made them taste almost good. Next, let's look at a cafeteria classic that seemed to haunt every poor kid's tray. By the way, if these lunches are bringing back memories, do me a favor, subscribe to our channel. It really helps us bring you more trips down memory lane. Number 4. Government cheese sandwich. Government cheese was legendary in the worst way. Thick orange slabs, harder than they had any right to be, were slapped between white bread and served as lunch. When melted, it could almost pass for grilled cheese, but most of the time, it wasn't. You had 2 cold bread pieces holding down a bunch of processed cheese the size of your palm. Poor families relied on government surplus cheese at home, and schools found a way to stretch it even further. You knew they could even use it as building material, but when it was your only option, you swallowed it with a carton of powdered milk and prayed for better days. Speaking of cheese, next up is the boxed dinner that became a poor kid's lunchtime essential. Number 5. Boxed macaroni and cheese. Today, boxed mac and cheese is considered a comfort food, but back in the 1970s, it was anything but. Cheap, filling, and easy to make, parents would scoop leftovers into a thermos or plastic container for lunch. By the time noon rolled around, it had thickened into a sticky orange block, the noodles glued together by that powdered cheese sauce. Nobody was jealous of it, but it kept you full longer than a single slice of bologna. At school, you'd open your thermos, and that smell would fill the table. Half the kids groaned, half nodded in solidarity because they had the same thing. Next, let's move from boxed dinners to the kind of canned meat you either loved or hated. Number 6. Canned Vienna sausages. You'd find this in a tiny tin, pale pink Vienna sausages floating in mystery juice. Cafeterias loved them because they were very cheap, and poor parents sent them in lunchboxes for the same reason. Warm or cold, they had that spongy bite, and the smell clung to your fingers all day. Sometimes they were packed with crackers, sometimes just slapped onto bread with mustard, but either way, any protein was good protein. Richer kids looked at them with disgust, but if you were hungry, you popped them like candy. They weren't flashy, but they filled the gap between breakfast and dinner. And speaking of canned meat, how can we forget the king of salty survival food? Number 7, fried Spam sandwich. Spam was the great equalizer. Some families swore by it, others swore at it. Poor kids in the 70s often brought fried Spam slices tucked into bread, maybe with ketchup or mustard if you got lucky. It had that shiny, greasy sheen, and by lunchtime, it was either soggy or dried out. Still, it was meat, and for many families, it was meat they could afford. Some kids were embarrassed pulling out their Spam sandwiches, especially when others had fancy deli meat. But among the poor, it was almost a badge of honor. You knew exactly what that smell meant when your neighbor unwrapped their foil. Now let's turn to something sweet, but not in the way you might hope. Number 8, syrup sandwich. Yes, you read that right. Poor parents often couldn't afford jelly or peanut butter, so they spread white bread with pancake syrup or even straight Caro corn syrup. The bread soaked through, turning it sticky and soggy, and by the time you ate it, your fingers were a mess. Kids with Twinkies or Little Debbie cakes didn't understand, but for a broke family, syrup was sugar, and sugar meant energy to get through the day. Sometimes you'd even fold it in half like a taco, so it didn't drip everywhere. It wasn't nutritious, it wasn't glamorous, but it was better than going hungry. And if syrup wasn't on hand, some kids had an even plainer option waiting in their bag. Number 9, mayonnaise sandwich. Nothing screamed a poor lunch like 2 slices of bread with nothing but mayonnaise between them. Just that tangy spread slathered as thick as possible to make it seem like more. Some kids actually liked it, while others hated unwrapping the wax paper. It was cheap, it was fast, and it used ingredients most families already had. Of course, if the bread was from the discount bin, it was already half stale, making the mayo soak in till the whole thing turned limp. Next up, let's talk about a lunch that always carried the taste of shame with it. Number 10, cold beans in a jar. Some poor kids came to school with cold beans, yes, straight from the fridge, spooned into a glass jar or a thermos. It could be baked beans, and sometimes black-eyed peas if you were lucky. Kids around you wrinkled their noses during lunchtime, but when your stomach growled, beans did the job. They had protein and fiber, and most importantly, they were cheap. Poor families often made a big pot for dinner, then scooped out portions for lunch the next day. It wasn't flashy, but it was important for survival. Number 11, rectangular cafeteria pizza. If you went to a poor school district in the 70s, you know this one. A sad rectangular slab of dough with barely there tomato paste and a sprinkle of mystery cheese product. The edges were either rock hard or soggy, depending on which tray you got. Some kids swore the pepperoni bits weren't even real meat, just red circles glued on. Still, when the smell traveled through the cafeteria, you couldn't help but get excited. It was pizza, sort of, and that meant a break from beans and sandwiches. Everyone remembers the look of that perfectly square portion, served with an ice cream scoop mound of canned corn. Pizza satisfied our cravings for comfort, but the next school lunch offered something a little heartier, a rich brown gravy over a patty that made you pause and grab a fork. Number 12, Salisbury steak with brown gravy. On paper, Salisbury steak sounded fancy, a steak in your school lunch. But poor schools in the 70s served a pressed patty of mystery meat drowned in some strange brown gravy. The texture was chewy, the flavor bland, and if you cut it open, you sometimes found hard bits inside. Still, it was hearty, and cafeteria workers loved it because it was cheap and filled stomachs fast. It usually came with mashed potatoes from a dehydrated powder mix, also smothered in gravy to hide the lumps. Kids joked it looked more like dog food than steak, but if you were hungry, you cleaned your tray. And if you think Salisbury steak was really bad, wait till you hear about the next school lunch on our list. Number 13, hot dog on a bun. Hot dog day was supposed to be fun, but in poor schools, it often meant a pale boiled hot dog slapped into a dry, crumbly bun with nothing else. No ketchup, no mustard, no relish, just meat and bread. Sometimes the buns were so stale they cracked in half when you bit into them. The hot dogs themselves were the cheapest grade available, more filler than meat, with that rubbery snap when you bit down. Richer schools might have had toppings, but poor cafeterias were always like, "You want flavor? Bring your own still." For kids who usually got beans or bread, hot dog day was something to look forward to. But not every day was a Frankfurter day. Sometimes the next meal on the tray was a humble mix of beef, pasta, and tomato sauce. Number 14, American goulash. Every poor cafeteria had its own version of goulash, a scoop of elbow macaroni mixed with tomato sauce and ground beef. Sometimes it was more noodles than anything else. Sometimes it had a watery soup texture, but it was always served in massive steaming pans. It filled you up, but rarely tasted like much beyond tomato paste and starch. Kids joked that you never knew what was in it. One week it had beans, another week it had leftover hot dog slices. The surprise wasn't intentional. It was just whatever the cafeteria had left over. And speaking of tomato-heavy food, the next dish paired that same red tang with something crispy and warm. Number 15, grilled cheese with tomato soup. In poor districts, the grilled cheese was usually just 2 slices of government-issue white bread with a slice of processed cheese barely melted inside. It was fried on a giant griddle with way too much margarine, which left it greasy and limp by lunchtime. The tomato soup came from a powdered mix or a watered-down can, tasting more like hot water with a little mix of ketchup. Still, when you dip that soggy grilled cheese into the soup, it worked. It was cheap comfort food, served in hundreds of schools across America. The next option stripped all the warmth away, swapping melty cheese for something far earthier, poured from government-issue cans. But before we talk about that, what was the poorest lunch you remember eating in school? Drop your answer in the comments. We love reading your stories and featuring them in future videos. Number 16, government-issue pinto beans. In poor school districts, the bean pot was sacred. A giant pot of pinto beans cooked until the skin split and the steam filled the serving line. What landed on your tray was usually the cheaper, overcooked end of that pot, soft, grayish, and sliding around anything it touched. Sometimes a sliver of pork or a splash of bacon fat tried to lend dignity, but mostly it was starch and protein that filled you up and cost almost nothing. Teachers called it nutritious, but kids saw it for what it was: plain, heavy, and endless. The beans didn't feel special, but they sat heavy enough in your stomach to carry you through the afternoon. They weren't glamorous, but they were dependable. The kind of thing a cafeteria served when the budget got tight. And if beans were the cafeteria's answer to stretching a meal, wait until you see what arrived on Fridays to make that stretch feel like an event. Number 17, Fish Stick Fridays. Friday felt different because the ovens smelled of breading and something slightly fishy. The fish sticks were cheap, frozen rectangles, more batter than fish, edges limp from mass baking, and sometimes a little freezer burn that no tartar sauce could hide. Kids dipped them in ketchup when they ran out of tartar, traded a chip for one good bite, or pretended not to notice the flaking mystery inside. Still, they made Friday better in a way beans never did. The plates looked a little brighter, and conversations got louder. For many kids, a fish stick lunch was the closest thing to treating themselves that week. But behind the mild excitement was the same truth. This was about feeding mouths quickly and cheaply. And when you needed something to soak up all that grease and make it feel like a meal, cafeterias had an old faithful that always showed up in a pan. Some of us loved Fish Stick Fridays, but the same can't be said for what's next on our list. Number 18, instant mashed potatoes with gravy. Those instant mashed flakes were the cafeteria's miracle of bulk cooking. Scoop, whisk, and spread into a mountain. By noon, they had lumps, a rubbery sheen, and the weird ability to cool into odd layers. Ladle on the brown gravy and you had something remotely potato-like. Kids pushed them around, smooshing the lumps with a fork to try and make them smooth, or piled on enough gravy to make it edible. Parents liked it because it was cheap and fast to produce at scale. Kids liked it because it was hot and soft. The potatoes didn't pretend to be gourmet. They were enough to fill the stomach. And if you thought this was the end of the bland, the next lunch item doubled down on convenience in a way that made everything feel trendy. Number 19, peanut butter and apple sandwich. When jam was absent and sugar was low, inventive parents fused pantry essentials: sliced apple layered with peanut butter between 2 pieces of white bread. It was a pocket of sweet and sour that bruised fast and left the bread soggy by the second period, but it stretched peanut butter farther and added a hint of fruit that tasted good. Kids argued about whether the apple made it healthy, but everyone agreed it was economical and sometimes surprisingly good if the apple was crisp. For the next item, the cafeteria line often slid out a heavy hitter meant to pretend there was some meat on the plate. Number 20. Mystery meatloaf. Meatloaf served in school was a lesson in disguise. It was a padded slab of whatever ground protein came cheapest, bulked with breadcrumbs, oatmeal, or vegetables to stretch it farther. It was frequently covered in ketchup or brown gravy, like a costume hiding poor ingredients underneath. When you sliced it open, the weird textures and colors you found inside made you want to trade it away instead of eating it. Still, this slab was meant to last a while in the stomach and the budget. For hungry kids, it delivered more substance than most other items. After a heavy bite of meatloaf, though, you often craved something lighter, something that tasted less like filler and more like a sweet, quick comfort. While meatloaf filled our poor bellies even though it literally sucked, the next school lunch on our list literally made some children vomit. Number 21, bananas and soft fruit cups. In poor districts, fruit wasn't always like the produce you'd see in commercials. More often, you got overripe bananas with brown spots, or mushy apples that had clearly sat in storage too long. When the fruit wasn't fresh, it came in those little metal fruit cups, diced peaches, pears, or fruit cocktail, swimming in syrup so sweet it made your teeth ache. Fruit was supposed to be the healthy part of the tray, but in reality, it was just another way cafeterias stretched cheap commodities. And while fruit was at least familiar, the next dish on our list was stranger, a meal that tried to be unusual on a budget and often ended up unsettling instead. Number 22, pickle and mustard breadwich. One slice of bread, a stack of dill pickles, and a smear of mustard. That's all the breadwich was. It leaked brine into paper bags and had a sharp vinegar smell that spread across the lunch table. Parents loved it because pickles were cheap and shelf-stable. Kids either enjoyed the salty crunch or just stared at it like punishment. Most tried to trade it away for chips or cookies, but it stuck around in poor lunch boxes because it filled stomachs for pennies. That sour bite made the next dish, the cafeteria's token vegetable medley, look almost appealing. Number 23, vegetable medley cup. A scoop of frozen peas, diced carrots, and limp corn steamed into a glossy grayish side. The medley showed up once a week, always sparkling with butter-flavored oil, always ignored. Kids pushed it into corners or mixed it into potatoes to disguise the boredom. It checked the cafeteria's healthy box, but tasted like an obligation. For poor kids, it was more of a necessity than a choice. After those soggy veggies, a home-packed thrift option, day-old bread felt more honest. Number 24, day-old bakery finds. Poor families swore by the day-old rack, bruised loaves, stale rolls, discounted crusty bread. Wrapped in wax paper, they became sandwiches, toast, or just plain slices spread with margarine. By lunchtime, the texture was unpredictable, soggy or tougher than expected, but nothing was wasted. It was a humble thrift, stretching grocery dollars while filling lunchboxes. And when bread ran out, a different kind of comfort food appeared, a can of ravioli, warm, red, and unique. Number 25, canned ravioli. Soft pasta pockets and sweet tomato sauce, scooped from cans into thermoses or cafeteria trays. Compared to bean mash or pickle sandwiches, it actually felt like a treat. The filling was thin, the sauce sugary, but it carried nostalgia in every bite. For many poor families, Chef Boyardee's canned ravioli meant both convenience and comfort. It ended the week on a note that was cheap, filling, and oddly beloved, a final taste of how thrift shaped a generation's lunch memories. For poor kids, these lunches weren't about taste. They were about getting through the day. Which lunch brought back your memories, the crunchy pickles, soggy veggies, or a warm can of ravioli? Drop your favorite or the most hated school lunch in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more bites of nostalgia.